Hi, everyone. It's the Monday Morning Analyst here on MMAfighting.com. My name is Luke Thomas. Thank you for joining me. This podcast works with three parts. Part one, a big overview. Part two, we break down some of the technical action from the weekend. And then part three, we take a look at what's ahead and things to expect. This past weekend, it was a few things, but it was basically World Series of Fighting 22. Yeah, let me move this mic a little bit closer. It was World Series of Fighting 22, and it was UFC 190. So a few things there. There was also a 5 grappling event where Gary Tonin got revenge, so to speak, on Joel Miao. I don't know how many of you actually care about that, but it was true. And then Tim Spriggs won the men's division, and I think Mackenzie Dern won the women's. And the men's division was stacked. Joao Assis, Yuri Samois, lots of big names there. Anyway, but I want to get to a few fights from the UFC 190 card. I didn't like the card hardly at all. I'll get to in just a minute. And the World Series of Fighting card actually was not so bad. I'll get to some of that stuff in just a minute too. But part one, let's just go ahead and kick it off. The podcast, I try to get it 30 minutes or less. I've been doing too much and it's been going way too long, which I don't want to do. I really want to keep this thing down to a minimum so I can get it up faster, so it can actually get up in the morning, shocking as that may be. So for the first segment, let's just do 5 minutes on the clock, and then we'll get going. Part one, the big overview. I wanted to spend part one of the big overview in this particular podcast for Palhares versus Shields. There was a lot of questions about to what extent what he did was unethical, or did he hold the tap too long. Let me say a couple of things. You need to watch the fight. The eye pokes are outrageous. They're completely and totally outrageous. And, I walked into the fight, before I saw it, I wanted to give Steve Mazzagatti the benefit of the doubt, because I actually don't think he was that late on stopping the fight. I thought his positioning wasn't awesome. I didn't think he was great, but I didn't think it was the worst thing I'd ever seen. I didn't think it was like one of those things where it was so egregious. The lack of taking any points or penalty for the eye gouging is simply unforgivable, but that's a separate issue, okay? About what to do with Mazzagatti and how he handled it. That's a separate thing we can talk about maybe on the live chat on Wednesday. I guess I want to talk about the submission itself, and I'll break down the fight in just a minute, but I mean about whether he held the Kimura too long and what it all means. Let me say a couple of things. Number one, yes, he held the Kimura too long. Did he hold the Kimura too long relative to how long he's held heel hooks or other submissions, both at ADCC and MMA? No, this is not the worst example that he's ever given us of his inability to control himself. And I've actually seen submissions held longer before. And submissions being held long, is not necessarily anything new in MMA. Remember, Babalu got cut from the UFC for doing it. Royce Gracie did it in the very first UFC. But the issue is as follows. I saw some people on Twitter, some people I respect very much, and I think they have a point. They were saying, look, what is the outrage over what Palhares is doing? I thought I was saying it's awesome, but what is the outrage if we're going to cheerlead when people like Hendo do the dive bomb on Bisping? Or, forget that example, just any case where a guy punches someone who's clearly out and then just waits for the ref to step in. And even if it's a clean stoppage, right, the ref did everything they could and the fighter did everything they're supposed to, you still have a case where you're handing out brain damage in the best case scenario, with a ref that still jumped in at the right time. How can we say that what Palhares did is uniquely worse than that? And I guess, so then asking the question, why is there outrage over this? And I guess my response would be because we're dealing with two completely different systems of combat. We've tried to meld them, but they have different rules and different ethics and, frankly, different realities. So look, obviously, there is a bit of a moral complication when you're finger wagging at Palhares and then cheerleading Hendo. You just are, you just are. And I agree with that. I think they have a very smart point there. But I think where I differ with everyone on Palhares is, first of all, you can make all the different comments you want, that he's a multiple-time offender and everything else. But the difference with jiu-jitsu is as follows. God damn it. Ugh, my computer here. The difference is the point about holding a submission too long is that it's nakedly unethical. And the reason why is because jiu-jitsu, unlike striking, there's much more control to be exercised over everything. I have my hands in place. I am twisting a position I have been in a million times against opponents of all different levels a million times. I know what the breaking point is. I know what this position feels like. I know exactly what I'm doing, and I have the ability at any point just to let go. Certainly someone has the ability to stop striking if they want. If they choose to do so, knock away, or, one punch drops them and then they walk away. But it's a little bit messier. So it's just not as clean. There is a cleanliness to jiu-jitsu with people who have an ethical view of it to exercise control in much neater ways. I really have a hard time seeing how that's not true, right? That's the whole point of jiu-jitsu. Moreover, there is a built-in system of surrender. Yes, anyone can tap to strikes, but it's not as bad as it is in boxing where there's a taboo around it. But it's just not an outlet that is as readily available to people who are choosing to strike as it is in jiu-jitsu. A tap is very, very common in jiu-jitsu. It's not necessarily all that common in striking, either pure striking or in MMA striking contests. When I say MMA striking contests, I mean contests where the two combatants choose to strike it out. They usually just want to live or die by the sword. And so when you have this built-in system of surrender, when you have this ability to stop something much cleaner because you're exercising more control over the elements in play, the idea of holding a submission past where it's supposed to go, past the point of a combatant surrendering, past the point of a combatant surrendering while a referee is begging you to get off of him, is so deeply unethical. It's deeply, deeply unethical. And it doesn't, we try to make comparisons to striking or other things. And I admit there are some complicating moral factors here about how we cheerlead some people striking someone when they're down. I think that's a fair point. But it's also, I think, in my judgment, it is when you recognize what jiu-jitsu is and how it has built itself. I don't just mean a code of honor necessarily. I mean actual things we've built into the system of play, the combatant surrender, and then the nature of the exercise itself, or the ability to let go immediately because you just have much tighter, cleaner methods of control. Your ability to manage that space means there's more responsibility on you to be cleaner about how you use that space. If someone doesn't tap, you can break their arm. But if they're tapping, it's not just that you have a moral obligation to let go. It's actually quite easy. You don't have to keep going. You can just let go. Even if you have a mounted choke, you can just let go. If you have a Rousey armbar, you sit back and you have it and they tap, you can just let go. If you have a Kimura and you're driving them over for a sweep, you can just let go. If you have a heel hook, you can just let go. It takes two hands to do a heel hook. Drop one off, see what happens. It's a very clean level of control relative to striking. So to me, holding it past is so willfully effed up. It's so totally unethical. I don't know what the Athletic Commission is going to do or what World Series of Fighting is going to do, but a multi-year ban for Palhares, I think, is completely justified. Totally and completely justified. He is a menace. He is a total menace. And even if this particular incident isn't necessarily his worst, and it's not, Jake Shields walked away okay for the most part on his arm. It's still, what he did was hold it too late. And when you talk about this many cases of this guy holding it this late, in a sport where holding it late should be super rare. It should be super rare. Think about how many guys hold a submission too long. It is a very small list. And every time they do it willfully. Babalu, I think it was David Heath, wanted to send a message to David Heath. And Royce Gracie wanted to send a message as well. I forget the French donk who he was doing it to. But was it Gordeau? Gerard Gordeau? Whatever the case. You get the idea. I find it completely unethical. Completely and totally unethical. Injuries happen in jiu-jitsu. Guys don't want to tap or guys don't realize they need to tap and bad things can happen. But when someone is surrendering and and by the way, like the sad part about it is like Palhares' technique on that thing, I'll break it down just a second, was sublime. Like he has an awesome Kimura. Devastatingly effective. When you have that kind of command in a system of combat where that kind of control is available to you, to hold on to things too long is so willful and so unnecessary and so dangerous, and frankly, at this point, kind of unforgivable. That's my take on that. All right. It's not the same as striking. It's just not. It's actually kind of why I like jiu-jitsu, is because I like having the control, or, fighting to get back the control. So with that argument out of the way, let's talk about some of what happened here. Okay. Let's pull up the results if I can. I don't want to spend a ton of time on World Series of Fighting 22. In fact, I'm just going to break down one fight, and then I'll be done with it. But I just want to get this out. Okay, World Series of Fighting 22 took place at the Planet Hollywood Resort and Casino in Las Vegas. I'm sure you have all seen the Nurmagomedov Shields beer throwing incident. I don't have any figures on attendance, but suffice to say, I'm sure it was okay. So look, Rousimar Palhares defeated Jake Shields via Kimura at 2:02 of the third round. So let's break this down a little bit. I thought, from a general perspective, I thought Shields had an excellent game plan. I thought Palhares, you can see the limits of his jiu-jitsu and then the greatness of it at the same time. Well, he is a limb snatcher, man. Forget the late stoppage for just a second. He is a limb snatcher. Not a much of a choke guy. The arms won't really allow him to be much of a choke guy, but he has such an ability where if he can control one of your limbs and then use the strength of his grip and then the tightness of his body to keep control of it, man, you are in deep trouble. You are in deep, deep trouble. And I frankly like the fact that he didn't use any leg locks this time. So first round comes out. Shields gets a takedown, and he covers his hips. You notice he has like a waist grip, and he's kind of off to the side. Palhares gets under his base, so Shields still has the waist grip. I think it may have been a gable grip or a C grip, but whatever the case, Palhares goes to his base, and you see what Palhares does. He sticks a left leg out. He sticks a left leg out because he wants to get, if this is Shields' legs, he wants to get one in between, so when they roll, he can wrap, right? He sticks one leg out, and then he rolls underneath. He sticks his right hand underneath and like shoulder rolls while trying to use trying to get his legs between one of Shields. Shields reads it immediately and just follows him. Just follows him right underneath so that they come back in the same spot. But this time, he's not on his base anymore because he rolled. So Palhares winds up going flat on his back. Shields still has the waist and is off to the side at this point. Let me make a point about Palhares that kind of gets slept on a little bit. Everyone talks about his ankle locks and everything else, and I just mentioned he's a limb snatcher. He has, I won't say awesome hips underneath. It's not like he's constantly moving all the time like Carlos Condit has really busy guard work. But when Palhares wants to use his hips, they are powerful, both to finish that Kimura, because the hips are involved there, believe it or not, if you've never trained before, but also just to shrimp away. He can create space really, really well. He must have a very, very strong abdominal core, and obviously has really practiced that move a lot. So that was one cool thing, though, that you could tell Shields was ready for. That the rolling is going to be a big part of Palhares trying to snatch a knee and get in between things, and Shields read it right away. It was great. So let's see. To get the base, blah, 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 blah. Oh, there was one point where you can see, so again, Palhares is, I think he was like an open guard or like a butterfly guard, and you can see him put his right foot on the left hip of Shields, and he tries to frame and then not push away, but just push on him a little bit. Get him to back up. So what does Shields do? Natural reaction that everyone does. He kind of pushes back in, gets down on his base a little bit. Palhares uses that to then drop his foot, try and throw Shields in front of him, and then hit the omoplata. Shields read it and just got his elbow in time to not get snatched. But this is what I'm talking about. He has strong defensive movement to shrimp out and get where he needs to be, or he has an ability to push on the hips to get a reaction out of you to then launch into offense. He wasn't able to chain much together. I would have liked to have seen him have a response if the omoplata didn't hit, but you got the job done anyway. But that was like a key moment where you can see him push on the hips, waits for the reaction from Shields, tries to hit the omoplata, and doesn't get it. But he's keeping Shields on his toes, man. Oh, last thing. How many times on this, and I need to be able to see myself here so I can make this point. How many times has your boy here on this very podcast talked about if someone is in side control and you're on top of the arm, you're not occupying the space, you don't have proper control. I'm not saying that they're necessarily going to get away. Proper control is when you have occupied this space. I've been saying it over and over and over and over and over on this podcast. And someone is finally listening. Not that they care what I have to say, but I just want to point out to you. Shields winds up he just basically hops over Palhares and gets into side control. All right. And from there, he tries to, work a shoulder pressure. But underneath, he's on top of the arm. He hasn't opened up the elbow. Palhares is here. Shields is on top. So what does Palhares do? Digs the underhook, throws him over with he does a bridge, throws him over, and then quickly corkscrews back to face him on there. So this is my point. If you don't have that space occupied, you just don't have firm side control, especially against someone really good and really strong like that. So round 2 comes out. And by the way, I think he gets his eyes raked in the first round before the last minute. So round 2 comes out. Shields gets a takedown. Doesn't finish it. Palhares tries to base. Shields tries to get the back, and Palhares rolls underneath. Shields again follows him, so he doesn't. You don't want to get caught trying to escape or getting caught in place. You want to go with him. Isn't able to sink the hooks because then Palhares turns into him. But again, that waist grip following him. Good job by Jake Shields. He was able to at least keep the angle that he needed. Again, after the first minute, Shields grunts from what appears to be an eye gouge. So there was one moment where Shields passes to mount. I thought it was pretty good. Why does